Arcade culture is weird. You pay money to get some shiny gold coins, use those to play riveting games for a maximum of 2 minutes at a time, and if you play them well enough, you get a new currency that replaces your arcade doubloons and can be used to barter with a likely underpaid employee for their spider rings and fun-sized candy. After the rise and fall of dedicated coin-operated or coin-op arcades in the 1980s, it's a wonder that arcades are even still around at all. I frequented the local amusement center, shout out Adventure Landing, with an arcade, mini-golf, and laser tag as much as the next kid. And despite the strangeness of the system, in retrospect, it was one of my favorite places to visit. I mean, it's every recreational activity smushed into one place, so much so that modern arcades can't seem to decide what they are. Are they a casino or a mobile game haven? Are they a rec center or a carnival? The lack of continuity in game type, venue style, and age demographic are what make modern arcades, as well as their infamous prize redemption setup, kinda weird. But arcades weren't always like they are today. In the early 1900s, the first penny arcades were introduced, also called amusement arcades. These penny arcades were the first instance of coin-operated mechanical recreation machines modeled after attractions that were already around at things like carnivals and fairs. If you believed in fate, a machine like a love tester or a fortune-telling machine could now read yours for you. Mutoscopes, a sort of early iteration of this technological wonder, provided media entertainment. And things like bagatelle tables were around as early forms of pinball machines, which would be invented and come to fruition in later decades. Most of these early penny arcade devices are designed around the novelty of the item. You come to see the new technology, get your fun, and then move on to something else. Spending an entire day in the arcade, or even more than an hour or so, to meander through the different machines was probably unheard of, because once your penny was spent, there was a limited amount to actually do. I'm sure most people back then would much rather sit on the beach in full daywear for hours than play the measly predecessors of video games. Penny arcades progressed through the next few years, with what's considered the first pinball machine being invented in 1931. It was called wiffle board and cost 5 cents to play. And another iteration called ballyhoo was brought out in 1934. While they might look a little dull in comparison to modern pinball machines, these games were the first of their kind and were the ancestors of video game cabinets yet to come. Some pinball operators would give away prizes based on high scores, and this is one of the first major instances of players winning prizes for playing an arcade game. It's hard to find information on what prizes would be given out exactly, but unfortunately for the people playing these at the time, they probably didn't include such classics as the Chinese finger trap or electric shock gum in the 1930s. Throughout the next 30 years into the 60s, mechanical arcade games like wiffle board would evolve into electromechanical or EM games. Now there were games like Periscope, a shooting submarine simulator where you launch torpedoes, Rifleman, a Wild West-themed target shooter, and racing simulators like Indy 500 and Speedway, using projections, a steering wheel, and a pedal to really make you feel like you were on the road. Watch out, Speed Racer. And just a bit earlier in 1958, the beloved arcade classic Skee-Ball was patented, being the first or one of the first ticket dispensing machines. Tickets and their prizes are one of the most notable parts of modern arcades, but they still didn't take off for another few decades. So what happened in those few decades? Well, video games were invented for one thing. Maybe you've heard of Pong, made by Atari in 1972, but these new games were challenging those little white bars with playable characters, virtual environments, and mechanics like shooting and dodging. By 1983, video game arcades were at their peak. Hardcore players would man machines for hours. Competing players would line up their quarters for a spot in line to play. The graphics were getting more detailed and the games more intricate. Dragon's Lair might not look that exciting next to, I don't know, Fortnite or something, but this was hard-hitting stuff back in the day. So what happened to the popularity of the 1980s video arcade? Well, there's a few theories. The hardcore players mainly stuck around, but some people blame the fall in the trend on the rise of home consoles. Home consoles had been around since the 70s, but by the late 80s, classics like the SNES, Sega Genesis, and Commodore 64 were beginning to take hold. Then, by the late 90s to early 2000s, almost everyone had some sort of home console, whether it be an N64, a PlayStation, or a Dreamcast. Many people just stopped going to video arcades altogether in favor of playing their favorite games at home and saving the quarter it cost per play. On a home console, you could save your progress, play as long as you want, and cry over dying over and over in the comfort of your own home. It was around this time that there was a major shift from typical arcade games for sport or entertainment to be converted or switched out entirely for games that offered something more engaging: tickets that were awarded for playing. Arcades shifted from appealing to young teens and adults to young children, and soon most arcade games and their simple cabinets weren't enough. Bright colors, loud designs, and flashy aesthetics were now being used to draw in the younger market that had mostly replaced the hardcore cabinet players of the 80s. And with this change came the rise of tickets and redemption prizes. I mean, have you ever met a kid that didn't like tons of bright colors and cheap plastic prizes? It's the perfect draw for children and their excitable, ooh look, something shiny nature. Some games or arcades had specially branded content like these Namco Pac-Man Fun Points tickets or these Chuck E. Cheese ticket redemption prizes from the 80s and 90s. For the most part though, the tickets and their prizes were generic, and over time the arcades known for joysticks and high scores were now filled with things like basketball, whack-a-mole, and Deal or No Deal. Not to knock entirely on modern arcades though, a lot of these games are evolutions of older ones, so their place in arcades isn't totally unprecedented. Shooter types have been around since Periscope and Rifleman, so something like Big Buck Hunter isn't strange to see. I would be interested to hear what a Rifleman lover from the 60s has to say about the Jurassic Park Seated Adventure though, or any of the others like it. With surround sound, privacy curtains, and rumble vibration on the guns, these modern shooters are a huge step up from an old projector-based submarine simulator. Driving games like Crazy Taxi have also evolved into motorcycle drivers with tilt controls and cabinet-based Mario Kart. You just can't escape this guy. At some arcades, there's even usually a good handful of classic cabinet games still around, though things like Pac-Man and Galaga usually don't reward tickets, in my experience at least, so there's not as much to incentivize players who aren't only in it for the nostalgia. So these modern arcade games aren't entirely like their ancestors, but they also don't exactly stand out as far as gameplay and familiarity goes. I think it's safe to say that they even belong and have a rightful place in arcades. These, though, yeah, I don't know. I'll openly admit that I sometimes play mobile games and occasionally even find them fun. In high school, I played Crossy Road like my life depended on it during class because I felt unlocking Emo Goose was way more important and fulfilling than reading the Scarlet Letter. But there's a bit of controversy about if games like Crossy Road or Doodle Jump actually belong in modern arcades at all. They're usually played on these big displays that are like giant versions of phone screens and dumb down the already simple gameplay of mobile games even more. Since mobile games and just smartphones in general are a newer technology, these arcade versions are clearly geared towards kids. Even more increasingly popular than recognizable mobile games is the influx of branded games from popular franchises. This particular Kung Fu Panda themed game has the player hit these targets that look like bongos to get a high score. Rhythm or physical movement games like Dance Dance Revolution aren't uncommon, but obviously tacking a brand onto it makes some people miss the less corporate days when games felt more original. So if you're a young kid and you're not playing Galaga because you don't know what that is, or Kung Fu Panda because that movie came out back in 2008, or Doodle Jump because you're an iPad kid that only uses apps like TikTok or those scammy GTA ripoffs, then what do you play instead? Well, there's a definite appeal to games that are a step away from traditional arcade games, even more so than mobile games. Arcade versions of classic Carnival booth games are becoming more prevalent for being more involved and physical. Water shooters and bottle knockers are among just a few that I've seen, though I'm pretty sure that if it already exists, there's what I'd call an arcade port for it. But do these belong in arcades either? Do these qualify as arcade games any more or less than Crossy Road or SpongeBob SquarePants Hit the Beat? There's still entire venues that are made for adults, with barcades, the cleverly named bar and arcade crossover type venues, becoming more and more popular in recent years. With adult-centric venues, arcades tend to trade something like Wacky Ducks for games that are more engaging for grown-ups. And what do adults love? Why, money, of course, which is why game shows that revolve around winning large sums of money have been integrated into arcades. Except now you can win something even better than cash prizes. Paper tickets. I guess I get the intent with these games. They're recognizable, easy to understand, and even easier to function as cash grabs when players look at the overly simple premise and take a gamble with the odds. But with games like Wheel of Fortune sneaking their way into modern arcades, the question of does this actually belong in an arcade seems to be answered more easily with each 3D rendered game show host that wanders their way on screen. Despite their name, game shows aren't even actually games in the traditional sense of the word. Most of the time they involve trivia or more or less random guessing, and the game revolves more around the suspense of it than any actual playing. But I'm not here to debate with GSN lovers, and I don't really have any beef with game shows when they're on their own turf, at least. It just feels like a bit of a cash grab to draw players in with known franchises they love just to sucker them out of a few quarters. I guess it's sort of a trend. Speaking of cash grabs, it's time we touch on another very notable type of arcade game, for better or for worse. Although winning tickets is a big draw of modern arcades, most games still require players to get a decent score while playing before awarding any considerable number of tickets. After all, if they awarded hundreds of tickets to just any kid who wandered in, they might make less of a profit on their plastic rainbow slinkies they bought for 10 cents a piece. So most arcade games don't offer many tickets per play with an average score, and if they do, they're likely a bit more difficult than something like Whack-A-Mole. Instead, why not play the Mega Super Ticket Dispenser 3000 Extreme Edition, or any of its cousins? These games that are mostly luck or chance-based and offer high amounts of tickets are widely known as Jackpot games, or any other variation of the name that implies it just absolutely shills out those sweet, sweet tickets for little to no effort. But there's some controversy around these games as well, and it goes beyond questioning their place in an arcade. Are these high-ticket jackpots with overly flashy colors and lights and simple mechanics actually gateway gambling machines for children? Short and obvious answer, no, or they wouldn't even exist. But longer and more complicated counterpoint, aren't they still kind of shady? They are clearly targeted towards a younger audience, that's pretty apparent, and I feel like spending money to spin a big wheel for the potential to win big falls into the gambling threshold, even if it doesn't technically count. I mean, if jackpot games counted, then really the whole arcade should count, and then the whole system would be null. But what I'm getting at, though, is close to the same point I made with the game show arcade ports. The entire point of these flashy machines is to draw naive and optimistic players into spending money on a play, only to usually walk away with a measly 5 tickets or less. The same can be said about similar games in the same vein, like the infamous claw machine, gachapon dispenser, or quarter pusher. Comparing these to the original version and appeal of classic arcades, this money-making tactic just doesn't seem to fit in very well with the intention of entertainment and amusement. They're just not games. They're luck testers. Or are they? There exists a whole sub-community of arcade players that are really into jackpots and how to win them, and these people are probably easily every arcade's worst nightmare. They find the easiest ways to win these jackpots by getting the timing just right and exploit the machines for all the tickets they're worth. They then will even make tutorials on how to win for other players to get their hundreds of tickets too, or make content around their skill like winning every jackpot in an arcade or completing some sort of ticket-winning challenge. As a kid, I saw the jackpot prize as something elusive that you had to be really lucky to get, so it kind of takes the fun and amazement out of winning plays now that there are everyday people winning 12 times in a row during a casual afternoon. It's like revealing the secret behind a magic trick. These jackpot fanatics just make me feel even more so that these games probably don't have much of a place in arcades for multiple reasons. There's a lot more game types that I could touch on, but there's so many that are constantly evolving that it would definitely take too much time to mention every single one. Let's just say that if it's already popular and can be exploited to make money, there's probably a version of it that exists in an arcade somewhere. But at least, all these games, even the slightly questionable ones, still only cost $0.25 to play. Oh wait, what? As arcade games continue to become more modernized, the arcades themselves have to adapt with the times too. And in the height of the digital age, it only makes sense that the venues that can afford it have swapped coin ops for mostly or entirely digitized payment options. Card readers on the machines can accept payment from credit cards, though some franchises have moved on to play cards or something similar that are loaded with credits and used as a sort of in-house arcade-specific credit card for the games. While these cards do solve the problem of coin-jammed machines and quarter eaters, this technology comes at a cost, and when paired with expensive new games and experiences, the prices for some arcade games has risen into the double digits for a single play with the most immersive and modern entertainment. It's speculated though that these play cards aren't around just for the modern appeal and ease of access, but also because they make spending money that much easier. It's not as hard to hand over a card to swipe when you can't see the quarters actively disappearing from your token cup. And it's not just tokens and quarters that are being phased out, but physical tickets and even traditional prize counters that have begun being replaced. Along with play cards, some venues have traded the cost of rolls of thousands of tickets for the cheaper and slightly less wasteful alternative of receipt paper. Instead of receiving one physical ticket per ticket won in the game, newer games with updated technology will now print out a slip with a QR code or other barcode that's worth the tickets earned in-game, functioning as a sort of ticket coupon. I do have to say, I remember watching the masses of tickets being fed into the ticket eater at my local roller skating rink, and seeing the now shredded pieces coming out on the other end directly into a trash can that was just full of discarded tickets, totally unusable. I get that they didn't want kids fishing counted tickets out of the bin to use for their own prizes, but the sight still made me feel kind of disappointed at the waste of it all, even as an 8-year-old. So these new ticket slips definitely reduced the total waste made by tickets, and I'm sure they also save both time and money. No more ticket eaters to maintain, no ticket dispenser jams, and no more rolls of tickets to keep in stock in the machines. Despite the positives, some people still understandably feel nostalgic for and miss the tickets of old. I have to say though, that even though it might offer some benefits of its own, I think the absence of prize counters is even more missed than a few paper tickets. In some venues, depending on size, staffing, and priority, traditional prize exchange counters with all of the definitely overpriced and cheaply made prizes that still look so appealing in their inviting glass cases have just been completely phased out. Prize dispensing machines, basically vending machines, now sometimes take the place of the employee that would usually have to sit and wait for 2 minutes while little Johnny tries to decide what to get. More so than seeming a bit out of place in any classic or modern arcade setting, these automatic prize vendors also just seem mildly dystopian. Automated systems replacing manual ones, of course, isn't something new, and if anything, as arcades continue to struggle to compete with home video games, it's likely for the best that this is used as a part of the effort to keep arcades alive and profitable. But still, it just rubs me the wrong way a little. It doesn't fit in or feel right, and it's a bit elusive to the rise of AI and machines that will eventually take over the world, or whatever. So if you've made it this far through the arcade, you've now played your favorite 5 games for a total of $20, ate some nachos with that questionable goopy cheese at the snack bar, and without a prize dispensing android stealing someone's job and probably data mining in the process, you now have amassed a sizable collection of tickets in neatly folded stacks that you can shove into your pockets, or in giant disorganized piles if you're a degenerate. On to the beloved prize counter. I find it interesting that arcade prize redemption counters have garnered this culture and reputation that they just can't grow out of. No matter how modern the games and technology are, at pretty much every arcade you visit, you'll still be able to find the same classic prizes. There's army men and sticky hands, bouncy balls and parachute guys, hacky sacks and bubble bottles, and individual pieces of your favorite candy, all for the low price of 50 tickets each, which only took you 3 tries on the Kung Fu Panda machine to get. Obviously, the majority of prizes have to be cheap for the arcade to be able to make a profit on them, but not to worry, there are some better options if you wander away from the glass cabinet to the wall of wonder behind the counter. There's fidget spinners, which are totally still relevant, lava lamps, which are also totally still relevant, full-size dolls, stuffed animals, yo-yos, and plenty of other toys that are apparently worth way more than bouncy balls and candy. If you work your way up to the really big stuff though, you can even win yourself prizes like light-up signs, bigger stuffed animals, and gadgets like RC helicopters and water guns. I remember my local roller rink had these big inflatable green aliens at the top of their prize wall, and I don't think I actually wanted one, but if I saw someone walking around with this top-tier prize, they were definitely categorized as the coolest of the cool kids in my mind. The most expensive prizes can range to tech like cheap tablets and even mini drones. The downside to the best prizes, though, is that they always cost, expectedly, just an absurd amount of tickets. They're mostly hanging there to catch the eye of hopeful players, incentivizing them to play as many games as they can, only to feel eventually disappointed when the majority of them come back with their huge piles from earlier that actually only amount to something like 500 tickets, and win them like 2 pieces of candy, a pencil, and one of those squishy balls with the little tentacle things on it. At the roller rink, I do remember that if you wanted a prize badly enough, the ticket price would equate to dollars and they would just let you buy it, so that inflatable alien could be yours for the steal of $6. But if you wanted toys that badly, you could just stop at the dollar store instead and buy them directly for less of a hassle. So, is it worth it to visit a modern arcade? I guess it really depends on what you're after. If you want that classic coin-op arcade feel, there are dedicated spaces with rows of cabinets and pinball machines, some even being free to play after buying food or other items from the venue. If you want to walk away with spectacular prizes after playing your best, you're probably better off joining an esports team or any other kind of competition instead. The ticket redemption prizes at arcades have always been mostly disappointing, and I think that's one of the main things about modern arcades that will never really change. There are multiple people who have tried to get their money's worth or even tried profiting at arcades, but it seems that they're specifically designed to prevent this kind of thing unless you're one of the few that really know how to exploit the machines. But if you're just looking for some lighthearted fun and don't care too much about the price of the reward, then you're looking in the right place. Not to sound like a boomer, but I do think there's something special in the social and novelty elements of arcades that things like modern video games and online play can't really replicate. If Candy Crush and Kung Fu Panda keep this culture around for a bit longer, I think it's definitely worth it to trade pieces of classic arcades for these newer games that manage to keep the neon and flashing arcade lights on a little bit longer.